So in this video, I'm going to finish up the French door series showing the install. I didn't get great clips of this just because I don't have a great camera. I was filming to the outside, so you're going to get shadows on the inside, but I did try to get the majority of it. So this was kind of the space I was starting with. It was originally a window, so it's a little bit easier process. Down here was an air conditioner, which is why the electric is a little bizarre. I had opened up the wall a couple months ago because this project didn't have a deadline. This is going in the house I'm staying in, so I'm actually doing it as a barter. It's part of how I pay for rent is these projects. So I had opened up the wall. I actually made a short about it, and I noticed the framing wasn't correct, so I knew I was going to have to reframe this a little bit before I put the doors in, which was a nice heads up and a bonus to working on a space you're staying in. So I don't have a lot of experience with siding, and this is aluminum siding, so I really wanted to be careful with it because I knew getting replacements for it would probably be really expensive and hard to source. So all I really did was cut this in the same frame as the window because I knew I had made this to fit in that hole. So you could see I had a laser line in there, and this electric, these outlets are turned off. So I'm not cutting into live wires, and I just cut down that extra piece, trying to keep that siding as in place as possible. I'm obviously going to have to end up taking some of it off to finish the outside. I'm not going to show a lot of the siding. Like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with it. I've only ever worked with it one other time, and that was with a contractor, so he was kind of taking the reins on that project. But a lot of this was just getting that window frame out, getting their framing out, and I was basically left with these two 4x4s on either side of the piece. I left that bottom plate in and then did my framing on top of it so that I could keep my framing on top of that plate, and then I went ahead and cut that out as well. So like I said, I knew I was going to be adding these extra studs. I'm going to be beefing them up so they're attached to the original framing in the room. These doors are very heavy. They've been in place for about a week now, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's very solid. You could see I'm doubling up the studs on this wall. The other side, it was close enough to the 4x4 that I just used a little shim in order to double that up to the piece that's there. Then I could set my frame in place. We got a little rain overnight this time of year. The weather is very unpredictable. There was a little part of a bird eggshell left on the threshold here, which I was hoping was going to be a good sign for the rest of this install. So once I had that bottom plate out, so when I found out that this floor is not level, it was off by about 1/4 of an inch. So I actually saw this technique online, and what I did was I leveled a piece of lumber on my level with some shims. That's how I knew it was about 1/4 inch off. And then once I had that level, I could set a scribe, which I had misplaced, so I used my compass to that mark, and then I could scribe it. Now I'm actually lifting this whole frame up by about 1/2 of an inch because I had the space to do that, and I want to be able to put a carpet on the other side of this room. I knew before I built this that the floor was lower than where I was going to be placing the jams, so I knew I had that space. So that's why that scribe was about 1/2 inch. And basically then I went to the shop and with a circular saw cut that piece following that scribe. I had to recut it. I was doing all this with one hand, so that original line you saw me draw was obviously pretty wonky, and you could see with that piece of wood I go from being about 1/4 inch off to being almost perfectly level. So I did 2 of those. I scribed them separately because this also tilts backwards a little bit, and then I added a bunch of Level X caulking, and then I attached them with some anchors into the cement pad that this is going on top of. Basically, I'm ready to put this in place. I have butyl tape pretty much anywhere it could go. The one nice thing is when I did tear all this out, except for where the air conditioner unit was, there was and one little spot over in the corner over here, OSB, I had to replace, had some water damage. Everything else was pretty good, so that's good. And they didn't use butyl tape. There's not even Tyvek on the outside. It's all tar paper, so as long as I do as good a job as they did, I think I'll be fine. I had to double up the stud over here because I had to move. I have a really deep shadow. They had the power running from this outlet to that outlet with a junction box for the air conditioner. I had to divert that electric up and over the frame. The nice thing is I built this knowing that, so I had plenty of room up top. But then I doubled up this stud over here because it was fairly wobbly, and this is a very heavy door. And then I put some, I guess, sister pieces or butt pieces, framing units also here, which connect to the original part of the house. I think this used to be a patio because these are painted 4x4s, and now this is super solid. It's not going anywhere. Same thing with the other side. I had to leave a gap for the wires, so I just used these shims. So the screws, which you can't see because they're covered with the tape, go through the 2x4, through the 3/4 inch piece here into this original stud, or 4x4, whatever you want to call it. So once again, extremely solid. It's not going anywhere. I'll show you how I addressed the threshold, because this was a 1/4 inch lower on one end, and I had to remove some of the grout. You could see on this side it was pretty thick. This floor is obviously not square compared to that side, and that's because when I took the original measurements for the depth, I was measuring some compromised OSB, which I thought was, I think, 3/4, but it's really not. So I was off by about 1/4 inch or so. It's not a big deal. It means I'll have to put some sort of pack around the molding because now the frame's going to stick out too far on the inside, but it's just one door. They did something similar to the original windows because they have this wainscoting on the floor and drywall up top, and it's 2 different depths. So it won't really be that big of a deal. I was lucky I was able to remove these pieces. So I put my pieces across the outside of my jamb so I could butt it up, make sure that it's flush against the house, and won't fall forward, which is going to be a concern because I'm pretty much doing this by myself, so they won't fall down on me. But that's pretty much where I'm at. So I did watch a couple YouTube videos to kind of refresh my memory on how to do this. I have installed one door before, but it was once again under the guidance of a contractor. I did see someone say that when you put your caulking for the threshold to sit in there, to do vertical stripes like I was doing, because just in case water gets trapped underneath, they could eventually exit out. So I didn't film putting this in here, but basically you saw what I did to get the jamb in here, and then I have these slats across the front which are holding it flush and plumb to the outside of the house. And then even though putting these new studs in there was a little bit of a pain, these are also plumb and square in all directions. So with that on the outside flush, putting this in place, now both my jambs were plumb, and I made sure they were before I put the doors in. So everything's looking pretty good. All I did was prop these up and put hinges in it. If you've been watching the series, you kind of saw how I did that. So far, this is looking pretty good. And then I knew I was going to have to trim that T astragal molding once it was in place. I was waiting to do a lot of this stuff just to make sure that all of my measurements were perfect. So I had to cut about 1/4 inch of a piece off the top. You can see what it looks like there, so it clears the jamb. And then the doors can close. Now the door on the right is going to be the passive door, which means that one's going to stay in place. The one on the left is going to be the one that gets opened and closed. So at this point, everything fit into place really nicely. I had the part of the lock installed the wrong way, so these little lock boxes are nice. You could just take them apart, and most of them flip them around and put that in place. Like I said, my jambs and everything are all level, so these doors were surprisingly easy to install. And I think part of that was because I was so anal about building this, because I didn't want it to not fit. So all I did was I kind of propped it in place with one of the shims, and then I just went through, and wherever I had hinges, I just slightly snugged in some shims, and then through the inner frame, I'm going to drill through those shims. Now I know if you're working with uneven surfaces, potentially poorly crafted doors, this could be a real process. I'm not gonna lie, for myself, because I think part of it was I made everything and I knew how my jamb did tilt a little bit, but I knew which way it tilted. So once I shifted it, it was pretty easy to do. You could see I have screws going through all of these shims. So at this point I have 4 3-inch screws sinking the whole thing in place, and all of my reveals are lining up. So that's basically what I'm looking for. If you watch install videos about doors, they always tell you to start with the side that has the hinges. This is a little difficult because obviously both sides have hinges. You can tell the doors are very flat and square because when you open it, it doesn't want to float into the room or self-close. If it's unlevel, that will commonly happen. And then once everything was looking good, I doubled this up. You probably don't need as many screws as I put in here, but I wanted to make sure these were never going to move. I did the same process with the shims, going through the outside. This will have to be patched, and I did them in between all of the hinges, and then obviously into the header above the door, and then I could put the knob in place. So like I said, I pretty much spent a lot of time preparing making the doors, preparing the area to put the doors in, but once the jamb was in place and I had them on their hinges, it really didn't need a lot of adjusting, which was nice. Then I could go in and put the interlocking channel on there. This interlocking channel came from the book I read about these doors, and he suggested putting caulking on the bottom of the 2 legs before putting it in place so water can't leak into the house. So that is what I did. And then I could just put that in place. I already had the holes and everything ready for this, so I could screw that into place, and then you could see how it locks. This is already pretty nice. I've seen ants on the other side of the door by this threshold, and it makes it so that they can't come in. So I knew when I put these bolts, these stop bolts on there, that the doors weren't going to close. I'd have to drill through this one a little bit because of the threshold I used. Luckily it wasn't as much as I thought it was going to be, but I have already done the one up top. I'm going to show you how I did the one on bottom. I just used the mounting plate they gave you and I obviously lowered the bolt onto this to make a pencil mark, and then I just used the bit that was in my Dremel to just lightly sand down this piece. Obviously the cylindrical shape of the bit is going to match the shape of the bolt, so it worked pretty perfectly. Now it clears the threshold. I didn't have to cut into it too much. And then I could tape this onto the floor and use the mounting bracket actually and the threshold as a guide for drilling the rest of that hole, and then that whole thing locks into place. So this door is pretty much never going to be opened, so that is why it is the passive door. I'm sure if you're moving big pieces of furniture in the house, it will come in handy, but even though these are skinnier doors because they're fitting a custom space, they're easy enough for a person to walk through. And like I said, it had already done the lock on the top. Once both locks are in place, this door is pretty solid, so I was happy with that. So then, because I'm using a recycled lock box, I obviously didn't have the other side of the jamb, which has the strike plate on there, so I ordered one on Amazon. Luckily it was close enough, but it didn't fit perfectly. You could see the lock gets caught, so I was able to just take it into the shop and sand down a little bit on the bottom there in order to get it to fit. So that is how it works. And then once everything was clear, I can mount that in the other door. All I did was put it in place where I wanted it, slid it up against the door, made some marks on blue tape, and then I could put the other piece, do the depth measurements for how deep I have to go. I can mount the other piece on the inside of the wall, and then cut all that. And I think I showed the finish part of that at the end of the video. For the outside of the house, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with vinyl siding, but I found this brick mold, which is the common molding for outside doors, that also had a J channel. So I wouldn't have to put on molding and then install a J channel around the door. I've never used anything like this before. It was actually really easy. I had a fairly large reveal on the outside of the door because since I moved the frame over, I had to match up with the vinyl siding on that one side. But once I had that in place, like I said, it was pretty easy. I just over mounted it, cut my angle at the top, And then at the bottom, all I did was let it rest in place, use a handsaw to match the angle of the threshold into that piece of molding, just kind of eyed it and drilled to where the edge of that threshold is going to end. And then I could just go up with an oscillating tool and cut that vertical. And then this will slide over the door. I left all this long because there's going to be a patio where this mud pit is, and there's obviously going to need to be somewhat of a step here. So all these wires and everything will get hidden, and I'll finalize it after that. And that's how I got those to slide into place. So that's what that brick mold looks like. And like I said up top, it was pretty easy. I just calculated the reveal, made some marks, and then I could cut the top piece as well. It slides right into that vinyl siding and makes everything look nice and seamless. To attach the miters up top, I'm using some vinyl silicone caulk adhesive so I could put a nice gob on there and then attach it to the top. For the weather stripping, this was one of the first things I bought, and I had to kind of hammer it in place because it's all silicone, so there was a little bit of friction causing problems. I don't show it, but I end up taking this out because the bulb on it was huge. It was like 5/8 of an inch, and the doors were closing on it and not pushing it out. I just went and got a cheaper version of that weather stripping, popped it in the kerf, and then it worked fine. I used a laser level to mount the second bit of hardware. This is the passive door, so this one won't spin. It's basically going to be a pull knob or a push knob. And like I said, I used the laser level to line it up with the other one, get everything in place, make sure the offset is the same, and I could attach those. And like I said, that's basically what it looks like at this point. The inside of this room is getting completely remodeled, so I'm leaving it as it is now. I reattached this the bottom piece of material, and you could see how I originally wanted it lined up, which I calculated for, but because that OSB was off, my frame is sticking in the room a little bit further, which is fine. I'm just going to need about a 1/4 inch packer on top of this 3/4 inch board. I thought of doing a rabbet on my moldings to account for it, but I don't really like the way it looks. So once it comes time to do this room, I'm just going to put a 1/4 inch packer on top of that, and then put all my moldings on top of there as well. So that was kind of how I dealt with that OSB being measured when it had some water damage. And then the doors are working pretty seamlessly at this point, which I'm happy about. You can see both sides are all on the same plane, which is really important. They close nicely, no binding. I didn't show this, but I'm going to have to go through. When I put the glass in, that sealant I used seeped out on the other side, which is what I wanted. I wanted a nice seal there. I have to go through with a blade and just remove all that. Everything needs to be pretty much repainted. There's a lot of touch-ups to be done. The outside of the house, a little bit of touch-ups, but in general, this is basically where it's going to be until the patio's done and that other room is remodeled. So like I said, I'm pretty happy with it so far. No fogging issues with the glass, but I wasn't really expecting that. I think if there's going to be fogging issues with the glass, that would come in the winter time. So there is that still to consider. But like I said, works pretty nicely. The knobs all work. It shuts nicely. It feels very secure. The lock works well. I think we might put another lock on it just for added security, but that's basically it.